By noon, the whole city looked like it was shining for everyone except Marcellus Vale. He stood outside the little flower shop on Briar Avenue, holding a bouquet of sunflowers that suddenly felt too bright, too foolish, too full of hope. 10 minutes earlier, he had believed the day might become the beginning of something beautiful. 10 minutes later, he was walking home with rejection sitting in his chest like a stone, trying not to cry in front of strangers who were laughing, eating lunch, and living as if hearts did not break quietly in broad daylight. Before we go further, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ancient Truth if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet love that sometimes waits right beside us. Marcellus had not always been afraid of love, but life had taught him to be careful with wanting too much. He worked at a small print shop downtown, where he spent his days trimming wedding invitations, funeral programs, birthday banners, and business cards for people whose lives seemed to be moving forward while his own stayed folded in the same lonely corner. He was gentle, the kind of man who remembered how people took their coffee and carried groceries for elderly neighbors without being asked, but he had convinced himself that gentleness was invisible. His roommate, Sariya, saw it differently. She saw the way he left the last slice of bread for her, the way he lowered the television when she studied, the way he fixed the kitchen window with tape and patience when neither of them could afford a repairman. She saw him, but Marcellus had never understood how much. That morning, he had dressed with trembling hope. He ironed his blue shirt twice, polished his shoes, and practiced smiling in the bathroom mirror while Sariya leaned against the hallway wall with a mug of tea in her hands. She asked where he was going, and he said he had a lunch date with Callista from the print shop, trying to sound casual, though his ears turned red. Sariya smiled softly, but something quiet passed behind her eyes. She wished him luck, told him he looked nice, and watched him leave with the kind of ache people hide when they love someone enough to want their happiness, even if it might not include them. The date lasted less than 18 minutes. Callista was not cruel, which somehow made it worse. She thanked him for the flowers, looked down at the table, and admitted she had only agreed because she did not know how to say no at work. She said he was kind, sweet, dependable, all the soft words that somehow landed like doors closing. She said she did not feel that spark. Marcellus nodded, smiled because he had been raised to be polite even while falling apart, and told her he understood. Then he paid for 2 lemonades, left the untouched sandwiches behind, and walked out into the sunlight feeling smaller than he had in years. By the time he reached the apartment, the sun was pouring through the windows, painting gold across the worn floorboards. Sariya was at the kitchen table surrounded by nursing textbooks, flashcards, and a half-eaten orange. She looked up the moment he entered, and her face changed before he said a word. He tried to make a joke. He lifted the flowers and said the date had ended early, so at least the sunflowers got a tour of the city. But his voice cracked on the last word, and suddenly all the strength he had used to get home disappeared. He dropped into the chair across from her and whispered that Callista had turned him down. For a moment, Sariya did not speak. The apartment seemed to hold its breath. Outside, traffic moved, someone laughed on the sidewalk, and a kettle clicked off in the kitchen. Then Sariya reached across the table and gently touched one sunflower petal, as if it were something fragile and alive. She looked at Marcellus with tears shining in her eyes, and in a voice so quiet it barely crossed the space between them, she said, "I wouldn't have turned you down." The words did not hit him all at once. They entered slowly, like sunlight through a closed curtain. He stared at her, confused, afraid to understand, afraid not to. Sariya looked away first, embarrassed by her own courage. She tried to cover it with a laugh, saying maybe she should not have said that, maybe it was just the sadness of the moment, maybe he could forget it. But Marcellus could not forget it. He had heard pity before, and this was not pity. This was something older, something she had carried silently through shared rent, late-night noodles, rainy bus stops, and evenings when he fell asleep on the couch while she placed a blanket over him. He thought of all the little moments he had mistaken for ordinary kindness. The extra cup of tea. The notes on the fridge. The way she listened when he talked about his late mother. The way she always said his name like it mattered. Still, hope frightened him. Rejection had made him raw, and the thought of stepping toward Sariya only to lose the safest person in his life terrified him more than loneliness. So he asked her why she had never said anything. Sariya smiled sadly and told him that some feelings learn to sit quietly because they are afraid of ruining the room they live in. She said he had always looked at her like home, but never like a possibility. She said she had watched him chase people who admired his kindness from a distance but never knew what to do with it up close. Then she apologized, as if loving him had been a mistake. That apology broke something open in him. Marcellus stood, walked around the table, and placed the sunflowers in a chipped glass jar beside her textbooks. He did not make a grand speech. He simply told her that nobody had ever made him feel easy to be around until she did. Nobody had ever made silence feel safe. Nobody had ever known him on ordinary days and still looked at him with warmth. His eyes filled as he admitted that he had spent so long trying to be chosen by someone impressive that he had missed the miracle of being loved by someone real. The days that followed were tender and awkward in the most human way. They did not suddenly become a perfect couple by sunset. They still burned toast, argued over laundry, and worried about bills. But something had shifted. Marcellus began walking Sariya to her bus stop before her hospital training shifts, and she began saving him the corner pieces of cake from the bakery she passed on the way home. One afternoon, they sat in the park under a white sky, sharing cheap coffee from paper cups, and Marcellus asked if she would go on a real date with him. Sariya pretended to think about it, then said she would, but only if he promised not to bring flowers that looked sadder than him. He laughed for the first time without forcing it. Their first date was not expensive. It happened in daylight, at the public garden, where children chased pigeons and old couples moved slowly beneath the trees. Marcellus brought one sunflower, not a bouquet, and Sariya carried 2 sandwiches wrapped in foil. They sat near a fountain that barely worked, watching thin streams of water rise and fall like tired little prayers. He told her about his mother, who used to say that love was not always thunder, sometimes it was someone remembering you hate onions. Sariya told him about her father, who had left when she was 13, and how she had spent years believing people always walked away once they knew too much. Marcellus listened, not to answer, not to fix, but to stay. That was when Sariya began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet exhaustion of someone who had been strong for too long. Marcellus reached for her hand, and she let him hold it. In that moment, he understood that love was not about being rescued from loneliness by a perfect person. It was about 2 imperfect people sitting together in the middle of their fear and deciding not to run. The city moved around them, bright and busy, but for Marcellus the whole world narrowed to the warmth of her fingers in his. But every love story has a test, and theirs arrived in the form of an envelope. 3 weeks later, Sariya received an offer for a nursing placement in another city, a chance she had dreamed about for years. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything. Better training, better pay, a future she had fought for with sleepless nights and second-hand textbooks. Marcellus found her sitting on the apartment floor with the letter in her lap, the afternoon sun stretching across her knees. She looked happy and devastated at the same time. He knew before she spoke that she was afraid of choosing between love and the life she had built herself to survive. For one painful hour, they sat in silence. Marcellus wanted to ask her to stay. The selfish part of him wanted to hold on to the first happiness he had trusted in years. But love, real love, did not place a cage around someone and call it devotion. So he swallowed the ache and told Sariya she had to go. He told her that her dreams were not a threat to him, and that he would never forgive himself if she made herself smaller to keep him comfortable. Sariya cried harder then, because she had expected fear, maybe resentment, but not freedom. The next month became a collection of almost goodbyes. Cardboard boxes filled the corners. Sariya labeled everything in careful handwriting. Marcellus fixed the loose handle on her suitcase and pretended it did not feel like repairing the thing that would carry her away. They spent their last daytime Saturday together cleaning the apartment windows, laughing when the soap ran down in crooked lines. Sunlight flooded the room afterward, making the small place look almost holy. Sariya stood in the middle of it and said she was scared that distance would change them. Marcellus told her change was not always loss. Sometimes it was proof that something was alive. On the morning she left, the sky was clear and painfully blue. At the station, people dragged bags across the pavement, announcements crackled overhead, and buses coughed smoke into the air. Sariya hugged Marcellus so tightly he could feel her shaking. She told him she loved him, not as a dramatic confession, but as a truth finally allowed to breathe. He told her he loved her too, and for once, the words did not frighten him. They steadied him. Before she boarded, he placed a sunflower in her hand. It was bright, stubborn, and open to the sun. Months passed, and distance did change them, but not by weakening them. It made them braver. They learned each other through phone calls during lunch breaks, sleepy voice messages, and photographs of ordinary things: burnt toast, rain on windows, hospital hallways, freshly printed wedding invitations at Marcellus's shop. He began taking design classes at the community center, something he had always wanted but never believed he deserved. Sariya encouraged him until his confidence became less of an act and more of a home he could live in. And when loneliness returned, as it sometimes did, it no longer convinced him he was unloved. It only reminded him that love was worth missing. A year later, on a golden afternoon, Sariya came back to Briar Avenue. She stepped out of a taxi wearing a pale green dress, her hair pinned back, her eyes searching the sidewalk. Marcellus was waiting outside the same flower shop where his heartbreak had begun. But this time he held no rejected bouquet. This time, the shop window behind him displayed a small poster he had designed himself, filled with sunflowers and one simple line: "Some doors close so the right heart can knock." Sariya laughed through tears when she saw it. Marcellus took her hand, and neither of them needed to rush. They had learned that love was not a lightning strike or a perfect movie scene. It was the roommate who noticed your sadness before you named it. It was the person who let you grow even when it hurt. It was the courage to say, "I wouldn't have turned you down," and the courage to believe you might be worthy of that kind of tenderness. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ancient Truth. Your support helps stories of kindness, healing, and second chances reach someone who may need them today. Special request: comment, "I believe in second chances," if you have ever been saved by someone's quiet kindness. Years later, Marcellus would still say the best day of his life was not the day Sariya returned, or the day they moved into a brighter apartment, or even the day they promised forever beneath a small arch of sunflowers. He would say the best day was the one that broke him first. The day he came home humiliated, carrying flowers meant for someone else. The day he believed rejection had emptied him. Because that was the day he learned that sometimes love does not arrive with fireworks. Sometimes it is sitting at your kitchen table in the afternoon light, waiting for you to come home, brave enough to say the words that change everything.